Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Ramazan Kılınç. I am an associate professor of political science and the director of Islamic Studies program at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Islamic Studies program is an interdisciplinary program housed at the College of Arts and Sciences. We organize events like this one for the public, but also offer a minor program for the UNO students. I know we have UNO students among us today. Please contact me if you are interested in minoring in Islamic studies. Today, we are lucky to host Dr. Evelyn Alsultany, a top scholar, or I should have said the top scholar of Muslim representation in the US media. Today's event is the 11th in our series, Dialogue with Muslim Communities in Omaha. It's hard to believe, but this is our 6th year in this programming. Through these events, we try to improve knowledge on Muslims and foster mutual understanding in our communities. These civic conversations have been only possible with the support of Humanities Nebraska. So we sincerely appreciate Humanities Nebraska's collaboration and support of this programming and this talk as well. As our usual guests would know, we do small group reflections between the talk and the Q&A. My friend and colleague, Dr. Patrick McNamara, graciously moderated our previous discussions. Dr. McNamara teaches in the Department of Political Science. He is the Director of International Studies major at UNO. He is the recipient of several multi-million-dollar grants to boost multicultural dialogue. Unfortunately, under the new circumstances, we will not be able to do small group discussions today. However, Dr. McNamara will moderate Q&A session after Dr. Alsultany's talk. Before taking too much of your time, let me give you a piece of information about the Zoom webinar. If you have any questions for the speaker during the talk or after the talk, please use the Q&A feature on the bottom. You can do that during the talk as well, as I mentioned. If you have general or technical questions, you can use the chat feature to reach us. During the talk, Dr. Alsultany will ask you to give some feedback on some of the videos. In that case, you can also use the chat feature. Now, let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Evelyn Alsultany. Dr. Alsultany is an associate professor in the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. Previously, she taught at the University of Michigan Ann Arbor for 14 years. At Michigan, Dr. Alsultany co-founded and directed the Arab and Muslim American Studies program, and also the Islamophobia working group to include Muslim students in universities' diversity initiatives. Professor Alsultany is the author of Arabs and Muslims in the Media, Race and Representation After 9/11, which you should be seeing the cover right now. Recently, she co-authored the Obeidi Alsultany test to help Hollywood improve representations of Muslims. Thank you, Dr. Alsultany, for agreeing to be part of our series. The screen is yours.
Great, thank you so much. I'd like to thank Professor Ramazan Kılınç for inviting me and also the Islamic Studies program, and Professor Patrick McNamara for agreeing to moderate today's event, and also all of you for joining us today. So what I want to do with our time together is talk about the last 5 years of representations of Muslims in Hollywood. And more specifically, as the title of my talk states, how media representations of Muslims changed after Trump's Muslim ban. You'll notice on this slide that in 2018, Layla Fidel, writing and reporting for NPR, said that Muslims are having a Hollywood moment. And what she meant by that is that there was suddenly a proliferation of representations of Muslims that we haven't seen before. On the screen, you'll see Hulu's Rami, which is the first time on US television that we have an Arab Muslim American family depicted. FBI is a show made by Dick Wolf. He also does Law & Order and Law & Order SVU and all the Law & Order series. And in this case, one of the lead FBI agents is an Arab Muslim character. Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj was recently canceled, but it was on for several seasons. Transplant is a show on NBC about a Syrian Muslim refugee doctor. And so something has happened in the last 5 years where we're starting to see a diversity of representations of Muslims. But in order to understand why I'm saying this is remarkable or new or different in any way, we do need to go back historically to understand the developments of representations of Muslims over time. This is a huge topic. I teach entire courses on it, an entire semester, but I'm going to try to distill it into 40 to 45 minutes. So what I want to do is show you 3 clips and contextualize each clip to give you a sense of how and why depictions of Muslims have changed over time. So the first period I'm going to cover is over a century long, and I'm going to do it very quickly. 1896 to 2001, scholar Jack Shaheen, who I will speak about briefly, referred to this period as marked by belly dancers, bombers, and billionaires. I should say that the depiction of Muslims over time is also the depiction of Arabs over time, because both of these communities have been conflated by Hollywood. So I'll be talking about Muslims, but you're going to notice that definitely for this first 100 years, it's mainly about Arabs. We'll start seeing some changes in the second and third period. So the second period we're going to look at is after 9/11. For about 10 years after 9/11, we're going to see some kind of change, more terrorists because 9/11 happened, but also we're going to see the introduction of patriotic American Muslims. And what are the limits and possibilities of this kind of representation? And then the third period, which is what this talk is structured around, is trying to understand what has happened over the last 5 years that we see a proliferation of representations of Muslims as people, which might not sound surprising, but when you see the history, it's very surprising to see Muslims depicted as anything but a reduced stereotype. So to get us started, I'm going to show 2 minutes from this 10-minute film that was made by Palestinian-American filmmaker Jackie Saloom. She made it in 2005 while she was a film student at NYU, and it's called Planet of the Arabs. And what she does is she takes representations of Muslims in a variety of Hollywood movies and TV shows and puts them together in a collage to hold up to us, look, this is how Arabs are being portrayed. So I'm going to play 2 minutes, and my question for you, and I'd appreciate if you would write in the chat to make it a bit more interactive, is how would you describe the portrayal of Arabs and Muslims in Hollywood according to this 2-minute clip? What are they like?
This is how I do.
Dr. Omar, does it say what God's command is?
To kill Americans.
It's your government we fight, not you. It's your White House. One day I will go there. I will drive a truck. And truck it will blow.
You have killed our women and our children, bombed our cities from afar like cowards, and you dare to call us terrorists?
Amanda White's boyfriend. Husband. Yeah, it was.
You didn't hear? She was there showing a fall collection. She got hit by a burst of terrorist crossfire, Palestinians, French police.
Oh my God. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. Look for money! Who? What do you think? Holy shit!
Attacking her weight loss. Attacking her weight loss.
There's no borders, no customs. Go anywhere in the U.S. There's nothing to stop them.
Have one bring the Arab section. Or you run into one of the grand mufti's gangsters and kill you. They'll slit your throat.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
American citizen. American citizen. Before we start drilling, where should we park the camels?
Okay, I'm going to stop it there, and I'm going to ask Patrick.
Dr. Alsultany, I do see terrorist in the chat. And anything else? Yeah, True Lies is probably one of the most offensive reps. I can't believe that movie is still regarded as good. Another portrayed as terrorist, dangerous, violent, villainous, barbaric, terrifying, villains, violent, anti-American, convenient bad guys, savages, violent, caricatured in these portrayals, jihadists.
Mhm.
Sounds like there's a theme that's emerging there. Back over to you.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for participating. So terrorist, anti-American, villainous, barbaric, bad guys, jihadists. So this is how Hollywood has portrayed Arabs and Muslims for a very long time. Let me get to the next slide. Jack Shaheen, who passed away a few years ago, was the author of the book Real Bad Arabs, How Hollywood Vilifies a People. And actually, this is the book that inspired Jackie Saloom to make that short video that we just watched, Planet of the Arabs. And this book acts like an encyclopedia. So Dr. Jack Shaheen watched over 1,000 Hollywood movies starting from the late 1800s until 2000. The book was published in 2000. And I did ask him once if he literally watched all of them or if he had research assistants do it. And he said he watched each and every movie himself and he took notes on them. And in this book, he says that out of the almost 1,000 movies that he reviews, that he would characterize 52 of them as even-handed and 12 as positive. He says that Arabs have been depicted as women in particular as harem girls. This is in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, a lot of belly dancers, harem girls, a very exotic depiction of the Middle East. In the 80s and 90s, we get the depiction of the oppressed Muslim woman who is fully veiled, and the veil signifies her oppression. We have the rich oil sheik that became popular in the late 70s and 1980s as a result of the Arab oil embargo of 1973. That depicted Arabs as wealthy oil sheiks who had the power to destroy the US economy and would use it, so an economic threat. And of course, the terrorist character that we're all very familiar with today. As I mentioned, Shaheen says that 12 out of over 900 movies that Hollywood has produced from 1896 until 2000, he would characterize as positive, 52 as even-handed. So that is a huge condemnation of the kinds of images that have come out of Hollywood throughout its history. This is me at age 7 with my brother and my dad, who was from Iraq, Muslim from Iraq, and my stepmom, who is Catholic from Colombia. We're on vacation here. And I wanted to share a personal story to connect the impact of this history of representation. So when I was around 7 years old, 8, 9, 10, when I was a child, I remember that there were instances where my parents would be asked, "Where are you from?" And it was the most common question we would get. We'd be out as a family, "Oh, where are you from? Where are you from?" They both are immigrants, both had accents speaking English, so people were constantly asking us, "Where are you from?" And sometimes my father would lie and not say that he was Iraqi. He would say he was Turkish. And I'm sure Professor Kalinch will get a kick out of this, but he thought, well, Turkey's considered more modern, more Western, perhaps more acceptable in a US context. And my stepmother, instead of saying Colombia, would say that she was from Spain. And little me, as a child, wondered why would my parents lie about where they're from? I don't understand it. And then as I continued to observe, I noticed that whenever my father would say that he was from Iraq, he would get questions about terrorism, about violence, about geopolitics, that he couldn't just say, "That's where I'm from." It wasn't a neutral place to be from. It came with a bunch of meaning that had been produced about it. And the same thing with my stepmother, a conversation about drugs and cocaine and smuggling. And sometimes these conversations would turn into accusations, asking, "Well, how do you make your money?" the implication being perhaps that's how they made their money, through some kind of illegal means, through drugs or terrorism or weapons or something like that. So as a child, I observed, and now as an adult looking back, I can see how these Hollywood representations really had an impact on my family, and has an impact in terms of how people perceive who Arabs and Muslims are, and other groups too that have been stereotyped historically. So representations are not static. We have this image of the terrorist. It hasn't been the same since 1896 to the present. Representations do change over time. We have in the 1920s and 30s and 40s this very exotic Orientalist Middle East, and then things start to change around political events, around the creation of the State of Israel, the beginning of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with the Iran hostage crisis also led to a shift in portraying Muslims as violent, and more conflating of Arabs and Iranians and Muslims, all is the same, all is very threatening and violent. 9/11 also led to a change, which I will mention in this next part. So change happens because of politics. Oftentimes, Hollywood portrays the perspective of the government. Not always, but historically that has happened. And protest can also lead to change. But there's no guarantee that protest will lead to change. So change can happen for many different reasons, from political reasons to actual people, audience members, community members protesting depictions. As we're going to see with the Muslim ban, and in this next segment, I'm going to turn toward looking at what happened after 9/11. So after 9/11, there was a shift. And you'll notice here some headline news articles. One of them says, most of these are talking about the TV drama 24. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it was a very popular TV show after 9/11. And it was about counterterrorism unit Jack Bauer, who has 24 hours to save the world from the next big terrorist attack. From the 10 seasons that it was on, I believe 3 or 4 seasons dealt with an Arab or Muslim terrorist threat. And Muslims were very concerned after 9/11 to see representations more and more. It felt like piling on. We're already in a war on terror. The entire government is already informing the public that Muslims are a threat. And now all these TV shows, Hollywood producers said, hey, you know, we're just ripping from the headlines and doing what's happening and making relevant TV shows. But Muslim community said, we're very concerned about what impact this is going to have if you continue to produce meanings that Muslims are terrorists. So you'll notice here, equal time on 24, Muslims say plot line unfair. Another headline says, Muslims encouraged by Fox 24 meeting. Network asks affiliates nationwide to air CARE's PSA. CARE is the Council on American Islamic Relations. And they were lobbying 24 to include a public service announcement, which they did. And the public service announcement included Kiefer Sutherland, the lead character, telling the audience not to confuse all Arabs and all Muslims with terrorists. Whether that's an effective strategy is another conversation. The other headline here is Muslims protest 24 terror direction. Groups fear Americans will take to heart the villainous roles portrayed on TV show. So there was a lot of concern in the Muslim community after 9/11 what more terrorist depictions will do. So as a result of both the Council on American Islamic Relations and the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, there was a shift, a small one, after 9/11. And I'm going to show this one scene from the TV drama 24. It's 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And I'm going to ask you once again, while you're watching the clip, to write in the chat, how are these Arab American brothers depicted here? What are they like?
Get away! Come on, get out! Get out of here! Stay for 1 minute! I'm a federal agent! Sure you are! Get away from here! Look, we need your help! Go, now! Just relax. I'm leaving. Okay, I'm leaving. Not the weapon. Now! Kick the gun over to me. name is Jack Bauer. I am a federal agent.
Well, you should have been here to help us and stop the looting.
You still have any rifles, or they get them too?
Behind the counter.
Show me.
Look, we're the first to be hit because everyone knows we're Arabs. I mean, we're good citizens. We had nothing to do with what happened today. Be quiet, Safla. He doesn't care. Look, take what you need, but leave us 2 guns. We chased the looters off once, but they'll be back.
Just stay there. Give me the keys.
What are you guys doing?
We needed to take cover.
What do you mean? Who's after you?
It has to do with the terrorist attacks. I have critical evidence that I need to get to the authorities. The men that are chasing us are responsible for this blackout. They detonated a device called an electromagnetic pulse bomb. It destroys all electrical activity within an 8-mile radius.
So everything that's happened to us tonight, the looting, the blackout, it's all because of the terrorists.
Yes, and the evidence that I have can help prevent further attacks from happening.
Jack, commanders will be here any minute.
Commandos.
He's right. You both need to leave this store. Right now, we're their target. You're not safe here with us.
Why don't you leave? This is our store.
If I had a choice, I would. But you have weapons and shelter. Right now, there's no other place for us to be.
Can I talk to my brother for a second?
Stay where I can see you.
My brother and I talked about this. We're staying.
I can't force you to leave your own property. But this is not just a bunch of looters. This is a very dangerous situation. I cannot guarantee your safety.
You don't understand. For years, we've been blamed for the attacks by these terrorists. We grew up in this neighborhood. This country is our home. If you're fighting the people who caused today's bloodshed, then we'll help you.
Okay, let's hear from Patrick, how all of you are describing these characters.
Yeah, got some interesting patriotic, loony, novelty, victims, villains to be taken advantage of, patriotic, hypocritical nature of the West. The US will stereotype other countries, but will accept blame of their own. My friend Bob writes, a very young Omid Abtahi. I'm not sure. Is that the actor who is in that? Okay, I'm not recognizing that. They're exaggerated as extremely non-compliant. Yeah, interesting. Quite a contrast from the earlier clip too. That's very interesting. Lack of trust between the federal government and Muslims. Second-class Western helpers. So there is this sense that they're trying to help. They called themselves Americans. This is our home. That is an interesting contrast. Back over to you, Evelyn.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone. So we have these patriotic Arab American brothers. They're also victims. They said, we've been blamed for these attacks. We don't have anything to do with it, but they're willing to fight. They're willing to sacrifice their lives to prove their patriotism. Someone also mentioned a lack of trust. So at the beginning, they're suspicious, but then by the end, they make their proclamation that they're terrorists and they're the good guys now. So we see a shift. There were similar kinds of characters before 9/11, so I don't want to give the impression that then 9/11 happened and then we got this patriotic character. There were a few examples before 9/11. So the 1998 movie The Siege had Tony Shalhoub plays a patriotic Arab American character who works for the FBI. The 1999 film Three Kings with George Clooney has an Arab character who helps the US soldiers escape Iraq. The film Not Without My Daughter, that is extremely stereotypical against Iranians, has this one character, an Iranian character, who helps Betty Mahmoudi, the American woman, escape. And so it's not the first time that we have a patriotic character, but what happens after 9/11 is that it becomes standardized. And what I mean by that is 98% of the time after 9/11, if you are watching a TV show or a film that has to do with terrorism involving Arabs or Muslims, the writers and producers, in an attempt to diffuse the stereotype and say, hey, we're not stereotyping, they will include a patriotic Arab or Muslim character towards that end. So we have many, many patriots. I'm going to review some of them with you in a moment. Regarding that particular scene, it happened because of the activism from the Council on American Islamic Relations and the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. We never meet these brothers again. It's a one-time thing, a few minutes in a scene, one episode. But in other seasons, we end up getting particular characters who work for the CIA, or in the case of 24 CTU, which is the counterterrorism unit, or for the FBI. So we have a lot of characters who are Arab or Muslim, proving their patriotism through working for a particular government agency against terrorism. My book, Arabs and Muslims in the Media, was born out of surprise. I was surprised to turn on the television and see these more sympathetic portrayals of Arabs and Muslims and Arab Americans and American Muslims on US television. I was surprised because there was a huge increase in hate crimes against Muslims after 9/11. The FBI reported a 1,600% increase, but a lot of my research has shown that hate crime statistics are woefully inadequate and inaccurate. So even this number is probably doesn't fully give the full picture. Many Americans after 9/11 supported the surveillance of Muslim communities. Studies showed that 22% of Americans would not want a Muslim as a neighbor. Public opinion about Muslims is very poor in the United States, especially after 9/11, but that does continue today. So after 9/11, there seemed to be this paradox where on the one hand, there were these sympathetic portrayals on television. There were storylines about American Muslims as victims of hate crimes. It was the first time that audiences had the opportunity to sympathize with Muslim characters rather than this long history where we celebrate when they're killed because they're evil and terrorists. So something happened where we could finally feel sympathy and connect with some Muslim characters. And all of that was happening inside terrorist-themed shows. And also while hate crimes were proliferating, workplace discrimination, bias incidents, airline discrimination, where Muslims would be escorted off of planes because passengers said that they felt uncomfortable being on an airplane with them, and lots of targeting, discrimination, both in terms of individuals on the street and also in terms of government policies like the Patriot Act or foreign policies going to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Patrick.
I just want to make one quick comment about and bring it home to Omaha. At the time of 9/11, I was actually the director of the Omaha Hate Crimes Project. And unfortunately, the mosque in Omaha was the most frequently targeted in hate crimes in the US. The Islamic Center of Omaha, the most frequently targeted. So that very much plays to right here in Omaha.
Yeah. So all of this happened right in your back door. Wasn't in some other place. It happens right here. Thank you, Patrick. But what we get is a proliferation of patriotic Arab or Muslim Americans. On this slide, we have Darwin Al-Said, a character on the show Sleeper Cell, which was around for 2 years after 9/11, 2 seasons, and it was about an African-American FBI agent who infiltrates a terrorist cell. And the character is Muslim as an FBI agent and also successfully infiltrates because he's Muslim as well. And so you'll notice here some kind of loosening around this idea of Arabs and Muslims. And so we have an African-American hero who is also Muslim playing this role. Next to him is Nadia Yasser, who is the character's name, who was on 24 one of the counterterrorism unit agents for a season. And then we have these two sisters on the show Quantico. So they are working for the CIA, twin sisters who are Muslim and very patriotic in their fight against terrorism. If anyone watched Homeland, you might be familiar with Farah Shirazi, who was an Iranian character on the show, Muslim character, and she really exemplifies the patriotic Muslim character. She's working for the CIA, trying to fight terrorism, and she gets killed at the hands of a terrorist, showing her ultimate loyalty and willing to give up her life to prove her loyalty. So while the patriotic Arab, Muslim, Iranian, African-American character is a departure from previous representations of Arabs and Muslims solely as terrorists and reflects some kind of improvement and is a result of pressure from communities, there are some problems with this representation. And one of the things I try to do in my research is look at the positive representations for the kinds of meanings that they produce so that we don't automatically assume that, oh, positive representation means everything's great, we're done. But what is the potential problem with these portrayals? So one is that we have a very rigid notion of patriotism articulated. So there are many different possible understandings of what patriotism is, aside from agreeing with the government 100% and fighting and dying for the government. Other notions of patriotism include, fighting for freedom of speech, critiquing US government policies, if you're against war, or if you have problems with US foreign policies or domestic policies, and that's not anywhere in the realm of possibility with these characters who are in a position where they must prove that they are patriotic in a very narrow sense of the term in order to belong in the United States. A larger problem is that the context of terrorism remains. So most of these characters exist in a storyline about terrorism. So the question is, what kind of departure is it really, and what kind of change is it making if we're understanding Muslims as either good or bad in the context of terrorism? Can we imagine Muslims to be doctors, lawyers, bad guys, different kinds of bad guys, good guys, an array of storylines, an array of characters. But after 9/11, even with this small expansion in representations, we're still stuck to the terrorism storyline. I should note, many of these TV shows used new devices. So 24, for example, had a season where you think it's a Muslim terrorist the whole time, and then at the very end, it flips it, and you find out it's the white president of the United States who's behind the terrorist attack. And this is a very common motif right now in a lot of terrorist themes shows, where you find that there's a twist and it's really the white businessman or the white man is behind it, and the Arab or Muslim terrorist is just a small pawn in a larger scheme. So my larger point with this segment is that it's necessary to move beyond an analysis around whether an image is good or bad and try to see how it's operating in the context of a storyline and the kinds of meanings that are being produced around that character. And in this case, there was protest that led to a limited expansion, a problematic one, but it is an expansion. It's certainly better than what came before it. So let's look at this. Oh, we're not going to section 3 yet. I have a few other things to say around impact. What are the impacts of these kinds of portrayals? What are the impacts of seeing Muslims represented as terrorists over and over again? Because again, these patriotic characters are in storylines about terrorism, and mainly it's Arab and Muslim terrorism, even if there's a twist. So my colleague Muniba Salim, she used to be a professor at University of Michigan. She's now at the University of Santa Barbara. She conducted a study where she found that repeated exposure to images of Muslims as terrorists in the news, on television, Hollywood, movies, leads to a correlation with support for both restrictive policies against Muslims, so restrictions on civil rights, surveillance policies domestically, and also support for going to war in Muslim majority countries. So there is a correlation if we're seeing these images over and over again that we're more likely to support policies that have dire impacts for Muslims and to assume that we should just punish all of them. This study out of the University of Alabama in 2018 showed that when Muslims commit acts of violence, the media reports on it 357 times more than violence committed by non-Muslims. Since the attack on the Capitol building, this might start to change. We're getting a lot more attention right now to white nationalist groups in the US. But over the last few decades, the focus has really been on Muslim acts of violence, giving the impression that other acts of violence don't compare, even when there has been a longstanding gun violence problem in the United States. So it's not to say that terrorism hasn't been a problem, but rather that it's overrepresented as a problem. So that's the second part, and we're moving into part 3 around the Muslim ban. So in 2015, when Donald Trump was on the presidential trail, on the campaign trail, before he was elected president, he announced his idea for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. It was an extremely controversial statement. Many people supported it. Many people were very disturbed by it and perceived him as punishing all Muslims and not having any kind of nuanced understanding of terrorism or of Muslim people. So he announced a total and complete shutdown, and then I have some dates there because there was a travel version 1, version 2, version 3, but basically from 2015 until 2020, we're going to see that it inspired change in Hollywood. First, it inspired mass protests across the United States. People protested at airports, people protested on the streets and outside of government buildings. You'll see these signs here: no Muslim ban, let them in, no ban. People were outraged and expressing and protesting against it. Then we have Hollywood's response. So Hollywood reacts with outrage and disgust over Trump's immigration ban. Another headline: no ban here. Hollywood finally embraces Muslim and Middle Eastern talent. Another headline: how Trump inspired DC's Legends of Tomorrow to add a Muslim superhero. And finally, another example: Muslim actors scoring more roles in Hollywood. Take that, Pres Trump. So there was a concerted response from Hollywood. They were disturbed by the Muslim ban that was announced. And you'll notice here that we also have a variety of ethnic groups portrayed as Muslim rather than only Arabs, as was the trend in the past. So we have Mahershala Ali, for example, here. We have Nanjiani, who's South Asian, Riz Ahmed, who's British, Pakistani. And regarding this TV show, DC Legends of Tomorrow, the writer or producer, Guggenheim is his name, he has a Muslim sister-in-law who shared with him how hard it was to be Muslim in the age of the travel ban, and he decided to create a Muslim superhero. I have a list of at least a dozen shows that have come out, some of which I've already mentioned: FBI, Transplant, Rami. Now we have DC Legends of Tomorrow, Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj. There's a show, 911 Lone Star on Fox. Actually, I think I have these images coming up. But there are many shows. It's not just one or two. There are at least, my list right now has 14, and I'm probably forgetting some. So this leads us to this Muslim moment in Hollywood. And how can we understand this response from Hollywood? And also, what does this change look like? So here are a few other examples. We have on the TV show The Bold Type, there's a queer Iranian feminist who has a relationship with one of the lead characters. We have Tan France on Queer Eye, Alison Abdullah on Orange is the New Black. We also have, this is an image of DC Legends of Tomorrow, 911 Lone Star. It's about a fire department, and one of the firefighters is a Muslim woman who wears the hijab. The rapper Common plays an imam on the HBO show The Shy. And then on Grey's Anatomy, we were introduced to Dr. Kadri. She's no longer on the show. She was fired, but she was there, I think, for a season or two. So we have this expansion in representations that happened very, very quickly after the Muslim ban was announced. So there was a sense of responsibility that Hollywood producers felt, and it inspired them to expand. And of course, the stereotypes are not gone, but it did inspire a very significant change. So I want to play 2 minutes from this trailer, the TV show Rami. Some of you might have seen it, some of you probably have not. And as I mentioned before, Rami is the first show about an Arab Muslim American family on US television. So for the final time, I'd like to ask you to write in the chat, how are Arabs and Muslims portrayed in this case?
Rami, do you want to stay alone forever?
Mom, you can't just walk up to a Muslim girl and like start spitting game or something. What am I supposed to say? Like, hey, can I get your father's number?
Yes, why not?
This Ramadan, I really want to do it the right way, man. It's been a weird year. And I feel like if I can just do this the right way, I can figure my shit out. I'm not going to look at porn, nothing. I just want to commit.
No porn. This case is no porn.
It's going to be tough.
No way. Impossible.
I'm going out.
Does anyone even care where Rami goes? You guys never ask him where he is.
He just told me he's going out.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
He literally gave you no information.
Yeah, I'm going to go. Love you, Mom.
I love you, Habibi.
I want to know who I am. I want to explore.
You're like the kids in Egypt. They throw down the government. Big revolution. Then what? No plan.
I don't know what I'm doing, man. I look at my parents and how strong they are and how they just know everything's going to be okay because they have God. And yeah, I have sex even though I'm not married.
What are you going to do?
So what? That means I'm not a good Muslim? I'm just like trying to be good.
You jerk off too much.
What are your goals for this life?
For this life?
Yeah, before the day of judgment.
Yeah, I'm not really like a big planner. I'm kind of more like an in the moment kind of guy.
Okay.
We've got some comments coming through here. One person asks, I'm curious if you've looked at British TV. I think because of their colonial history, you'll find more Indians, at least on TV, also Pakistanis. Another person writes, just like us, relatable. I would ask, who is the us that in that statement? Millennial, modern. Rami is shown as Muslim American who's struggling to connect with his religion and his culture in a secular society. This is a common representation you find in movies about Indians. The parents are usually the first generation and more old school, and then the kids, who are portrayed as more American, are stuck in the middle trying to navigate and figure things out. Both worlds, right? 20-somethings trying to figure out where he belongs, just like non-Muslim kids his age. Human, another person writes. The contradictions of all humans. More positive. It brings up important questions and topics about Muslims and their relatability. Laid back, a sense of humor, trying to find oneself, intersectionality of culture, religion, personal identity. Another person writes, I would describe it as that Muslims are not separate and that they're different. Just like everyday Americans, normal, quote unquote, writes another person. Back over to you, Dr. Alsultany.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. So relatable, millennial, modern, the generational struggle, 20-something human struggle, positive, funny. Muslims have not been portrayed as funny. So finally, we have a funny depiction, intersectional and normal. So we have a very different kind of representation made possible through the show. And one show cannot fix an entire history. We need many, many shows. But I want to talk briefly before I end about a test that I co-created with Sue Obeidi, who is the director of the Hollywood Bureau at the Muslim Public Affairs Council. And she does a lot of consulting on representations of Muslims in Hollywood. And I've done a lot of research on representations of Muslims in Hollywood. I actually met her on a consulting job, and we decided to join forces. We were talking about how there are many tests available to assess representations of a variety of groups. There is the Bechdel test, which is to measure representations of women. And that test says that if you have two women in a show talking to each other, they need to be talking about something other than a man for it to pass that test, because there have been so many depictions of women throughout history where all they care about is attention from men. There is the Duvernay test, named after Ava DuVernay, the African-American filmmaker. And that test is about showing people of color having fully actualized lives. There is an LGBT test called the Russo test, after Professor Russo, the Russo test. And it talks about having LGBTQ people not in the background, but in the foreground. Having also fully realized lives is basically the theme of all of these tests. And it is quite shocking that it's taking this long to actually produce images of a variety of groups of people as human, as multidimensional. And so this test is based on some mistakes that we've noticed, where people are making an effort and then something falls short and it minimizes the potential impact of the representation. So it has 5 criteria. The first criteria is that the project that includes a Muslim character does not reproduce or reinvent old tropes, but rather explores new contexts and storylines. The idea here is that some writers and producers think that if you go back to old Orientalism like Aladdin or Sinbad is going to be remade, then that's better than the terrorist one. Or others, like Jack Ryan, is recreating the terrorist storyline by giving terrorist characters a lot of backstory. We're trying to encourage writers and producers to look at new stories. There's so many stories to tell. Why go back to the Orientalist ones that have been told many, many times? Why stay attached to the terrorist one? The second criteria is that the project that includes Muslim characters has a Muslim identifying writer on staff to ensure that Muslim cultures, religion, characters, and storylines are being portrayed accurately and authentically. There was a scene on 911 Lone Star with the Muslim firefighter where she is praying in the firehouse, and it's a beautiful scene because you don't really see Muslims praying on television unless they're about to commit a terrorist act. And Muslim Twitter went crazy because she wasn't praying properly. So the actor portraying this character didn't get the proper training to fully portray Muslim prayer accurately. And that could have been avoided if there was a Muslim on staff. Third, the Muslim character is not solely defined by their religion. Religion can be part of the backstory, but shouldn't be the entire story. There was a TV show on Netflix called Messiah. And this was another situation where it was clear that the writers and producers were trying to do something different. But most of the characters of European or Israeli descent had very fully realized lives. And even if they weren't likable characters, you knew a lot about them. And then in contrast, the Arab characters and Muslim characters were very much understood as either political or religious beings. And then the fourth is that the Muslim character has a strong presence and is essential to the storyline. We don't expect this to happen all the time, but we want to avoid a situation, as with happened on Grey's Anatomy, where Dr. Qadri was in the background and irrelevant. Whether she's there or not didn't really matter. She was just window dressing in the background. And that's fine sometimes, but we want to encourage writers and producers to do more. And finally, the Muslim character is portrayed with diverse backgrounds and identities. And what we mean by that is that we love seeing Arab Muslim characters, but there's so many Muslim identities to explore. So we want to encourage writers and producers to explore African-American Muslims, Indonesian Muslims, Chinese Muslims, Latino Muslims, etc. So I want to flag that just because things are better now, it doesn't mean things are great, period. And so this test is trying to address some shortcomings that have become very common. So this is my last slide. And in closing, I'll leave you with a few takeaway points. So we see that protests can lead to an array of outcomes. It did lead to the patriotic Muslim character. It led to Hollywood expanding the field of representations after the Muslim ban. It could also lead to no outcome. After 9/11 was not the first time that people protested stereotypical representations. So you can protest and have no outcome, or you can protest and have, some kind of modest outcome. Another takeaway point is that it's not enough for representation to be positive. That doesn't end the story. There's lots more to consider in terms of the kinds of meanings that are produced by the storyline, by the character, and that positive is not enough in itself. Third, it's important to scrutinize the parameters of inclusion, the storyline and the centrality of the character. So we don't want every Muslim character, look, we have one, they're in the background, they don't matter. Or look, we have one and it's the context of terrorism. So we need to think about, this is very much connected to, it's not enough for the representation to be positive. We have to think about these other issues. Our goal is an abundance of stories so that one story does not define an entire people. Often when I give talks, people ask me if I think there's something wrong with depicting Muslims as terrorists, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think the problem is that we've seen that repeated over and over again, and stereotypes are powerful when they're repeated. And so what we need is, if Jack Shaheen looked at 1,000 movies and only 12 were positive, we need 1,000 movies that are so diverse so that the terrorist stereotype is just one of many stories we can imagine. When we think about white characters, it's an array of representations, so there isn't one image that we have in our mind. So that's really the goal in terms of where we want to go with representations. And my last point is that it is too soon to say if the last 4 to 5 years will lead to long-lasting change. I'm actually very concerned that social change tends to focus on crises, even if there's been a long-standing problem. So it's too soon to say whether the changes that we've seen so far will make a long-standing impact. So I will end there. Thank you so much for being here and for your participation, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alsultany. This was a wonderful presentation, a great overview of Muslim's representation over time. So now I will take Dr. McNamara to take questions, but in between, since this is lunchtime, some of our guests may leave. I want to acknowledge some of the units that helped us in doing this program. We are also, in addition to Humanities Nebraska, Political Science Department, Religious Studies Department, and History Department at UNO were also helpful. I'm especially thankful to Goldstein Center for Human Rights because they publicized the event widely, especially Angela Brown. Thank you. Also Goldstein Family Community Chair, International Studies, and UNO Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So I wanted to acknowledge these units before we start Q&A because we may lose some of our guests in the Q&A because it's work time, I acknowledge, but I'm thankful that we had this great attendance at even at this lunchtime. Thank you. Now I'm now taking, Patrick will take over.
Thank you, Ramazan. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And I'm just looking back at the chat, and there are so many thank yous to you, Dr. Alsultany. Nice job. Thank you. I want to just acknowledge one comment that my friend Lori Arias, who runs our international student advising at UNO, says that she liked the Rami clip and said, I've advised international students in Omaha for many years and must say that despite the mosque incidents post 9/11, we've had hundreds of Muslim students right here at UNO who really enjoy life and studying here in Omaha. I believe we work to bring a more welcoming community. And just to say, Lori, thank you for that acknowledgement there. I'm now going to get to some of the questions in the Q&A. First, I want to acknowledge my friend, Professor Nasser Al-Sharif at Creighton University, who actually has been part of the Tri-Faith initiative, which grew out of that incident at the mosque, and the way that the community has come together with a church, a synagogue, and a mosque all co-located on one campus in the Tri-Faith Project. Nasser says, American popular media is multifaceted. While there are many positive trends, do you feel that there's a change in the regular TV coverage, say news or radio, newspapers, any hope with Fox News, he says. How do you feel American Arab and Muslim comedians have played a role in Muslim representation?
Well, thank you for that question. I do think that comedians have played a really important role. Some of you might be familiar with the Axis of Evil comedy tour and the comedians in that tour, which includes Dino Badala, who's often a commentator on CNN. And I do think that comedians play an important role in terms of highlighting the hates and the hate crimes and sometimes the government policies. And even though they're not funny, in actuality, the way in which they talk about them, they allow us to talk about them. They allow us to laugh at the absurdity of how we think about the other. So I do think that they have played a very important role. Regarding news and radio, it's really mixed. Throughout the last, since 9/11, throughout the last 20 years, I do think that there have been moments where news reporters would pause and say, hey, let's talk to Arabs and Muslims on the street and see how they're doing, what their experiences are. So I think that some journalists have really tried to make an effort to, similar to how Hollywood has tried to make an effort to bring in and not alienate these populations. But at the same time, there have been instance after instance of reporters. There's some, really funny clips of Reza Aslan, for example, Professor Reza Aslan on CNN and other networks, just pointing out the assumptions behind the questions that are received about Muslims, the commonality in asking about the Muslim world and talking about all Muslims as one thing. So I do think that there are certain problems that continue, but it doesn't mean that there aren't efforts by certain journalists and from not just civil rights groups, but Arab American writers and Muslim comedians who are always trying to challenge it and explore new kinds of meanings that can be produced about these communities that have been so demonized. And right now, I don't have any confidence for Fox News, but you never know. You never know. I think we are in a moment right now, and anything is possible. But regarding that part of the question, I'm not. I don't see it. I don't see any evidence right now.
Can I ask a follow-up question that actually one of our STAR International Studies and Political Science double major students, Josie, asks, what can you've named what a lot of the kind of thought leaders can do, but what can ordinary people do to combat some of these negative stereotypes that you illustrated?
So what's been extraordinary to witness is that the representations will change if audiences demand something different. And the platforms of Twitter, for example, does provide a way for everyday people to have some power. For example, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite that went viral. And it drew a lot of attention to this very, very long history of the Oscar only focusing and honoring white actors and white achievements. And it led to Hollywood really looking at itself. And right now, the Oscars has new criteria that if you want to be considered for an Oscar, you must have a number of things, one of a variety of things, but you have to have some kind of diversity in your film right now to even be considered. So I think that it is possible for audiences to organize and use social media. Writers and producers are scared of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, and they're willing to change and grow if their audience is pushing them. Another example that's not specific to Arabs and Muslims, but I like to think about Arabs and Muslims in relation to larger racial politics, is Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians proved to Hollywood that you can have non-white casts and you can make money on non-white casts. And people do want to see these movies because for a long time, directors, producers said, we have to have a white lead if we're going to make money. The others don't make money. So there is change, and a lot of it is dollars in the box office and people actually using social media in a way to highlight and protest on social media and really highlight the problems. Thank you.
Can I build on that? My friend Bob Holbert, who works with our Center for Afghanistan Studies, asks about Muslim superheroes. You made a reference to that earlier, and he says he thinks that'll break down barriers. He's currently researching Kismet, Man of Fate, an anti-Nazi Muslim superhero created around 1943-44. Fascinating history. I don't know if you know anything about that. You could reference that as well. But I know you referenced something in nowadays, right?
Yes, thank you. I don't know. I want to know about Kismet, 1943-44. I'm curious. But yeah, I think superheroes would be wonderful. And it's not to say that all to undo this history, that all of the representations need to be positive and amazingly positive. They can be varied and diverse, but yeah, it'd be great to have some superheroes. So right now we have on DC Legends of Tomorrow, Muslim superhero, and there is the comic book Ms. Marvel, which is a Pakistani Muslim superhero. And my understanding is that it will be turned into, I don't know if it's a TV show or a movie, but we will be seeing Ms. Marvel on screen, which is also part of this very exciting moment we're in. And actually just last week, maybe some of you saw this, someone was sending me this viral video that an Arab American made about an Arab American superhero. It's a video that looks like a trailer, and it's about an Arab American trying to be a superhero in his life. And it's very, very funny. I can send it to you afterwards.
Great, I look forward to seeing that. Our Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dave Booker, asks, one of the most powerful presence on American Muslims has been Khizr Khan. Thoughts on his impact?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So Khizr Khan, for those who are not familiar, he made a historic speech at the Democratic National Convention, not this last presidential round, but before, when Hillary Clinton was running for office. And he and his wife, Ghazala Khan, their son, fought in the US military and died fighting for the United States. And you might recall he stood up on the podium and waved the Constitution and challenged Donald Trump, have you even read the Constitution? And it became this memorable moment. I do think that he made a really important impact with his speech, with his loss, with showing Americans what Muslims have been through. And at the same time, I do think he fits within this patriotic Muslim trope of trying to prove he's patriotic, prove he's lost his son. And so my criticism is not him. I think he's a wonderful human being, but rather that this story has been used to try to explain to Americans that Muslims belong here because of their specifically patriotic in one way and have sacrificed, and that's the pathway to inclusion. And so what I try to do is highlight, are there other ways that Muslims could be included? What do other groups have to do to be included? Can you just be included because you're a nice person? Do you have to do so? What do you have to do? And is it narrow? And so those are the kinds of questions I'm interested in. And so I have a criticism more of his story and how it's used rather than him as a person who's sharing a very beautiful and heartbreaking story.
Thank you for talking a little bit about that Gold Star family. One of the questions that we have is about the CIA's influence on Hollywood. How do you think that the CIA's influence in Hollywood has led to some of the portrayals of Muslims in movies or TV?
So I've read a little bit about this, and what I've discovered is that if you are making a movie and you want either the CIA's input in terms of being realistic, or more specifically, if you want to film at headquarters, or if you want to use military machinery and you need the US government to give you permission, in those situations, then Hollywood writers and producers are expected to do what the CIA tells them. You're using our equipment, you're using our facilities, and therefore give us the script, and we will make some changes to make sure that we are presented in an honorable way. So historically, that has meant a very positive portrayal of the military, very positive portrayal of the government. But there was a shift in the 1990s around portrayals of Vietnam, for example, looking at the horrors and the impact of war on soldiers, the impact of war on people. And it's become more common to criticize the government in movies. One example, let's see, which one should I pick? Three Kings from 1999 it shows a military that's ineffective, that's in Iraq for what reason? And it has a criticism of the US government in sending these soldiers to this place to go to war. So it's not the case that all of these movies are pro-government and pro-CIA, but those that want to use the equipment, and I think Homeland is probably in this category, have to have their scripts approved. And of course, the CIA wants a particular kind of portrayal. I mean, if you give me a script, which I have done, how do you think Muslims are being portrayed in the scripts? I'm not going to say they all have to look rosy, but I'm going to say don't stereotype. So you can do this change and that change. And if you give a script to the CIA, they want to make sure they look good. And so I do think that that relationship between Hollywood and the CIA has led to some very positive depictions of the CIA. But then at the same time, it's become, at a certain point in history, there was a break from everything the government does is good to we're allowed to have criticism in movies. We're allowed to critique. But what's interesting is that you can have that critique and still have Arabs and Muslims demonized in the same film.
You're right there at University of Southern California, and I know that the connections with Hollywood are very tight. Interesting that you've actually seen some of those scripts as they're coming out. I wonder if you'd comment on another question that we have, which is around non-Muslim actors playing Muslims, and there's been, of course, critiques about straight characters playing gay characters or non-trans playing trans characters or whatever. How do you see that playing out in Hollywood, and have you seen a change over some time?
So yes and no in terms of change. I think this is a really important issue and speaks to the change that Hollywood needs to be making. There are so many examples where people of color are played by whites, with the excuse being, but we need a white lead. So I'm thinking about The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, or Ghost in the Shell with Scarlett Johansson. There are others that involve either Arab, Iranian, or Muslim characters. There was one, was it Exodus, with Christian Bale as the star. So it's very, very popular, common to have white leads for roles that are supposed to go to people of color. Same thing with gay and trans roles, and people are sick and tired of it. And so this is one of those moments, people are sick and tired of it. Hollywood is listening. Does it mean they're getting it right? Sometimes, not all the time. And our Obeidi Alsultany test also, so I'll say this, in terms of religion, it's tricky. Because if there's an Arab actor or Arab role, I think an Arab should be cast. If it's a Muslim lead, since a Muslim can be any ethnicity, it's not as clear to me that the person has to be Muslim. It helps if you already are familiar with certain aspects of what it means to be Muslim. It definitely helps with the role. I don't think it's a requirement in the same way as it is for someone who's gay or trans or of a particular ethnicity. The TV show Transplant, which, you know, it's a very important show at this moment because it shows a Syrian refugee doctor is played by a Pakistani Canadian actor. And I had the opportunity to be on a panel with them and to ask them that question. And the writer said that he cast widely and that he had many, many people audition for that role, and that this particular actor was the best one for it. And the actor playing the role was annoyed by the question. But from where I'm standing, it's like you're getting all these things right. And then this one thing, people don't know the difference between a Pakistani and an Arab. So I do think it's important to try to just get it right. So there are many instances where people are trying and then they're just not, they're falling short of that objective. But I do think that it is very important for, you know, for thinking about diversity, and people are so committed to this idea of diversity. This is a very easy way to start. And it's a real cop-out to say, I looked for all these people and I couldn't find one. There are no gay actors to play a gay role. There are no trans actors to play a trans role. Arab actors play. It's just not, I don't believe it.
I'm going to stick with that Hollywood. Yeah. Sorry about that. I'm going to stick with that Hollywood theme and ask, do you know of portrayals where a Muslim character has dated or been romantically involved with a non-Muslim character? And how does that get portrayed?
So do I know of instances where a Muslim character is romantically involved with a non-Muslim character in movies? Okay, there are many. I'm trying to think of one. Two things came to mind that are very different. Not Without My Daughter came to mind, where the Muslim character is married to a white woman. And what happens? The scariest thing imaginable. He says, we're going to go to Iran to visit my family. We're just going to go for 2 weeks. And then he gets to Iran, and he was previously this really nice, he's a doctor, really nice guy. And he gets there and he turns into this like possessed Muslim demon, which is part of the fear that even if you appear really nice and normal and reasonable, that you're infected by Islam and you're going to revert to your essential nature. And so that's what happens to him. And he becomes abusive towards her and doesn't allow her to leave Iran. And everyone in Iran is trying to entrap her and keep her there. And finally, she's able to escape with her daughter. So that's I think it's a very telling example in terms of historically the portrayal, because the white woman is being threatened. She's at risk. And there's a long history of white women being the subject of threats by a variety of men, whether it's Latino men, Black men for sure, threatening white women, and Arab men too. Makes me think of Rudolph Valentino in the 1921 film, The Sheik. He kidnaps a white woman and waits for her to fall in love with him. And then at the end, she does. The more recent example that came to my mind is Rami. So in the TV show Rami, he's dating a lot of Jewish girls, and then he's trying to be more observant, and he says he's ready for his mom to set him up with someone. So in that case, he's depicted as having a struggle. Should he be doing what his family expects him to do, or should he just be himself and date whoever he wants and do whatever he wants? And so in that case, it's a very different kind of depiction. I'm sure
my friend Rich Juro. Yeah, my friend Rich Juro actually makes the point. He's the chair of the board for the Schwab Center for Israel and Jewish Studies. at UNO, and he says a lot of Israeli films do portray this, romance between a Jew and a Muslim in the kind of Arab Israeli context. We do have some other questions, but I'm going to actually go over to Ramazan for a second. Ramazan, shall we continue with a couple more, or shall we begin to close?
I think we can do 2 more questions and stop getting new ones if it is okay with Evelyn as well.
Great. So one question is about Jack Shaheen's work and this 52 even-handed, 12 positive. Is there a list in his book about that? And I would be interested, actually, adding to that question, how does his research align with your test that you shared with us earlier? Mm-hmm. Same or somehow different?
Great question. I was just looking at my bookshelf to see if I have his book, but I think it's in my office that I haven't been in for a year. But yes, he has that list. I wish I could pull it up and tell you more about it. So Jack Shaheen's research is an essential resource for my research and anyone who does work on Arabs and Muslims, representations of Arabs and Muslims, since he basically shows us, here's a 100-year history, and then he has another book about post 9/11 representations. So I couldn't do my research if he hadn't done his, in the sense that today I wanted to talk about the last 5 years, but we can't talk about the last 5 years unless we go back and understand what's happened so we can make sense of today. And my research tends to be very contemporary. I'm always focused on, right now I'm writing a new book on the last 10 years. And again, I can't do that without the people who've come before me and have really established the groundwork. How our research differs is, I think, in 2 ways. One is that Jack Shaheen did like a positive negative approach. So he was just delighted if there was anything good because he had seen so many horrible things. Mm-hmm. But I think that the conversations in the United States around questions of diversity and how do you do diversity and how do you do it well is really where my research is concerned with those kinds of questions. So there are these efforts being made. Great. What is the outcome? And it's not to say, oh, you're doing it wrong and you're doing it badly, but how can we think about what do we think diversity is? What do we think that, how do we do that? How do we do it well? So I think that's really, it's a different kind of question. He did a lot of, he has an archive at NYU with all of his papers. And I visited the archive once, and there are many letters that he would type or handwrite to movie studios and to journalists and just be like, hey, that thing you did last night, there's a problem. So he was also an activist, really impressive. I wish I did that. It doesn't even occur to me to do that. But for the person who was asking about the power of the audience, it's not just tweeting, but you can actually, write an email and say, hey, that movie you wrote, here are the problems, or that news story last night, here are the problems. So for me, Jack Shaheen's work is indispensable. I think about him all the time. I couldn't do any of what I do if he hadn't set the foundation. But I think that the conversations right now are just a little bit different, and I'm trying to look at gray areas.
I really appreciate your research, and I'm looking forward to reading the new book that you just referenced. I wonder, another question that we have is about how these portrayals, these media portrayals regarding young Muslims, how it affects their identity and their development. Do you have any suggestions about readings on or other commentary on the kind of adolescent development and psychological development on the identity as these portrayals get played out?
So I don't have any studies in mind, but I remember when Jack Shaheen used to give lectures, he would say that one of the impacts is on young people's self-esteem. That if you're growing up and you're just seeing yourself, and this is also part of a larger conversation today about why representation matters. It matters to see yourself. It makes you feel like you belong here. It makes you feel like you're part of this country. And when you don't see yourself, you feel invisible, like you don't matter, you don't belong. Or if all the images you're seeing are that your people are bad, it can really impact a child's development and sense of self. So I do think there is a tremendous impact on self-esteem. One of the classes that I teach is about Hollywood representations throughout history. And when we talk about the Aladdin from the 1990s, a lot of my students say, we love Aladdin because that's all we had. So they're like, now I'm watching it with a new framework and I'm seeing that the good characters have American accents and the bad characters have Middle Eastern or other kinds of accents. And I'm really upset now watching it. But at the time, that's all I had. And it meant everything, even though it was bad. And I think many of us can relate to that, that sometimes even the bad ones can be meaningful if you don't have anything else. But now there's a possibility of maybe we can see something different, and maybe younger people can feel like they belong and that they're valued and part of this country.
What a wonderful note to end on there. That is excellent. I really enjoyed. I wish that I was there at USC and could come audit your classes or something. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Evelyn. This is a great presentation. Ramazan, over to you for closing.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Evelyn. As Patrick said, this was wonderful. I really enjoyed learning the past and also your note about the future, which gave hope, especially the last part of your presentation. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'm also thank you, Patrick, for your moderation and being part of this series from the very beginning. And I'm also, the third thank you goes to our audience, our attendees. Thanks for joining us at this lunch hour. And probably most of you are at all your homes, but still working, have other meetings and so forth. So thank you so much, and tune with us for future events.
Thank you all so much.